Okay. We are ready.
All right, can everybody hear me? Yes, all right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. So glad you guys could join us for our Software Solutions Work Group meeting. We will go ahead and call this meeting to order. Let's see. And yes, the live stream is good. Here we go. All right, so we will go ahead and start with a roll call. Jacinta, will you handle roll call for us?
Yes. Eddie Gonzalez, Lumiere.
Present.
Marcus Johnson, Corey Melton.
Present.
Darren Toston. Terrence Watt.
Here, thank you.
You have a quorum.
All right, and Ms. Clay, do we have any general public comment request?
There are no public comments at this time.
Okay, all right. And let's see, I do see Mr. Neil Skeen is attended as well, so thank you. And then, so next we'll go on to our next thing, which is review of the ITN. And Ms. Sika and team, if you guys want to talk about the draft procurement for the enterprise software solutions, provide some general comments around that. I think Holly will also have some PowerPoint slides to share, and I'll let you guys take it over from there.
So thank you. Hopefully everyone can hear me. Thank you all for joining us. Just appreciate your work so much and volunteering to help us come up with what we believe to be a good RFP so that we can begin the process of building an enterprise solution for the CSC of Leon County. I am going to turn it over to Holly here. Want to, of course, thank Neil for joining us. So you are on camera, Neil. Normally he's in our audience. So we want to thank him for that. So we expect that this will be the last meeting of the ESS work group. Again, cannot thank you enough for volunteering your time. And if all goes well, we will have an RFP that we can issue, like I said, to begin building that enterprise system so that as we move into priority funding, we have a very good system to be able to manage that very efficiently and effectively. And most importantly, being able to pull out the data that will show our community how we are moving along to try to help to move the needle for our children, youth, and families here in Leon County. So again, thank you. And I am going to turn it over to Holly McPhail.
All right, thank you, everyone. And thank you, Sika. I just want to give can everyone see and hear me okay? All right, thanks, Corey. So I just want to kind of start off with where, like what's in the procurement. And before kind of really launching into that, you might have noticed that Sika used the word RFP instead of ITN, which we want to address. And I'll kind of go through that. So my plan is just to walk us through the document. I do have it up and available if you want to point to a particular page, I'm able to pull it up on screen at any point, but just kind of want to walk you through the 7 sections of the actual procurement. And then I kind of conclude with basically some just basic questions of how we might want to facilitate some discussion or before moving, or kind of the next steps for moving forward for our purposes. The goal of today is to have a document with potential edits or potential reviews to then send to our governing council committee later this week, and then to have a full month with it, kind of out there tweaking it, whatever edits might be, really put it out there so that members of the public might be able to come and speak to it, so that we can have something out and available to respond to by the middle of next month. And we're going to go a little bit over that timeline. But the only thing I just want to put out there, and I think I mentioned in the original email, is that this is still with our legal department. So what gets presented on Thursday might be slightly different in terms of some of the, I'm going to say, the legalese that's included with it. might look slightly different from the version that you have in front of you. So it is divided into 7 sections, kind of with an introduction overview, an explanation of the solicitation process itself, the exact response format and contents requested by respondents, an overview of the evaluation process as well as the award process. And then technically it's exhibits and then the draft scope of work, because it's technically the first exhibit. However, it's such an important one that we're going to spend some time on that one. And then we'll talk a little bit about the other exhibits as well. So basically, if you kind of look through it, it should look fairly familiar in terms of, I'm going to say, the substance sections, as they've been in front of you before and you've provided a lot of feedback previously on them. So really in the intent and the goal statements that are included in the introduction, there's no real changes from what you previously discussed and decided upon and advised for us. This section does include boilerplate language for certain required pieces like background of the organization, quiet period, etc. I will point out that in the background of the organization, there is some added information to it about the work of this group in terms of what you looked at, what you were hoping to do, how we issued the request for information, and then how we went into that kind of market research phase over the summer. And so that's kind of described in detail. And that's just to let folks know that we did previously do some market research out there. And while that RFI was very clearly indicated would not result necessarily in any type of procurement, we have decided to move forward from what we learned during that period. Section 2 is all about the solicitation process itself. So we are recommending as staff to the work group changing from an invitation to negotiate to just I'm going to say a simple RFP. Nothing about this RFP is simple, but after we were doing the market research, we determined a couple of things. One, there are comprehensive and integrated solutions available. And 2, when we've talked to other organizations that had done something similar, the process that's inherent to an ITN, right? So this vendor can do, 1 through 3 of the modules that we're requesting, but can't do number 4. And maybe another vendor only really wants to be our number 4, but can't do 1 through 3. And then we force them to work together. Has actually not gone super well in the business that's out there. So upon discussion with our legal team, the idea that if an entity only really does 1 through 3, but has a preferred vendor for like module 4, that we would recommend that they bring that to the table as a package, so that ultimately from our perspective, because we are such a small staff, that we're working with one company and they're figuring it out, and that integration piece is working well. So that was something that we learned during market research. In addition, that there are entities out there that can kind of do a lot of everything that we're talking about, or have worked with vendors that can. So we do believe that there are comprehensive, probably more integrated solutions available, and not just a single one vendor can do it all. But given that, kind of keeping that in mind, in fact, even in the market research, one entity shared, well, if we were to bid, these modules would be dependent upon you having this other module from a third party. So that was one of the main reasons why we wanted to switch from the ITN process to the RFP. The other reason why we wanted to switch from RFP and putting it out there is for timing. An ITN, that negotiation process adds a couple more weeks onto the process, anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks typically. And by doing the RFP, we're able to streamline the actual procurement process by just a little bit. And then the idea, hopefully, and I'll show the timeline in just a minute, is that we could have a contract in place as of December 1st, which would give the staff internally time to kind of build the architecture and the governance documents in collaboration with the vendor, so that when we hit the new year, as Director Green alluded to at the very beginning, when we go to release the next phases of actual procurement, that we'll hopefully have some of these solutions in place. Even if it's just the application process, to really, really help us get to where we need to get to, so that we're not manually tabulating Excel spreadsheets, and which is basically what we did for this summer. So I'll share that this is the proposed timeline. The items in red indicate the actual governing council meetings where there could be I said public input. One of them is bolded, and that could also have public input as well. But in essence, what you see here is today's meeting, which should be 8:15. So show me a publication without an error, and I'll show you a lie. I found my first typo. Fabulous. Hopefully the goal is to, like we said, present the procurement later this week, have it open for review for that month, and then finalize it at next month's governing council meeting, and then to release the procurement. We have deadlines in there for questions and responses due, and then to have that full response due. We did, based on the recommendations of the work group, build in time for actual vendor presentations, which we believe by statute can be closed for the purposes of the presentation and then made publicly available, redacting out anything that might be trade secret. And having that done by the middle of October, then to have our first round evaluations completed, tabulated, and then published at a public meeting where members of the evaluation committee would come together, ideally with members of the council, to publicly discuss how they ranked individuals. And the purpose of that meeting would be to reach consensus based on the evaluation criteria that this work group has developed, come up with that best value proposition, and have that kind of decided and then submitted with the intent to award. After that, between the 3rd and the 17th, if the timeline all goes well, the council approves that intent to award. At that, I clearly did not update the 3rd column. My apologies, everyone. That should be November 3rd. And then there's a 7 to 10 day period for any protest that could emerge. And then ideally the contract is approved at the November council meeting with that contract implementation start date, as we said, of December 1st. So pay attention to the middle column, not the right column. And I will make sure that I get those updated for what goes on our website. The next section in the ITN is really about the response format and contents. So this should look somewhat familiar because it almost echoes exactly the evaluation criteria that you previously developed. But in essence, it just goes through very specifically what we would want included in any type of response: cover letter, that experience reference section, and then breaking out each section for how we want them to present it. So it's going to be very easy to follow with the scoring criteria. That was feedback actually that we received in through our first round of procurements, not only with our summer funding, but also last year with our ITN to develop the needs assessment, that however they present their proposal to you, you should have your evaluation criteria follow along with that, so that it is very easy to follow and score. Also, you'll see, if you've kind of gone through each of those sections, some of the language that you guys submitted, that the work group submitted to us in terms of making sure that the platform has the right technological capacity that they're hosting on, including what we internally might need to purchase, and then how those software applications stand up on those platforms. And then of course, the two big issues really is the customer service side of things, implementation services, ongoing training and support services, and the cost. We also worked in their instructions for vendor presentations, since we want those demonstrations to be part of how you might score. We gave instructions on make sure that you include this element, or this element in that vendor presentation, so that they not only know that it's coming, but then when you get to the scoring criteria, it's going to match. Did they cover this? Yes. Did they cover this? No. So again, that the total score that might be available for each of these is not just dependent solely on what was written, but also what was demonstrated during that presentation. Which brings us to the next section of the ITN, which is the evaluation of responses. And this should look really familiar, because it's exactly with one major change. Instead of the top one just saying vendor profile and references, it now says experience, qualifications, references, to kind of allude to each of the elements that are underneath that. Other than that, it's exactly the same in terms of the 7 criteria, and that the math going up is 100 points. We made all the edits that you requested previously, making sure that that ongoing training and support services was just as not heavy laden, weighted equally as the initial customer service elements, and that cost and the applications themselves were just kind of the 2 highest rankings. So that was our conversation. I believe it was from late March that we had that piece of the conversation built into the scoring criteria. We will issue, once our evaluation team is set, we will issue what is called an evaluation manual that will kind of give instructions on when to score a 1 or a 2, when to score a 3 or a 4, and so forth and so on, so that it's very clear to the evaluators how they should score each element. And then of course, all of these documents will be made publicly available at the conclusion of the procurement process. So the award process pretty much is 7 little paragraphs and points. That's just boilerplate language. Unless you have questions on that, I'm hoping that one we can feel pretty good about. And then under the exhibits, there are technically 4 exhibits. The first is the draft scope of work. The second is the current technology environment. So this was something gleaned from the market research and from some of the recommendations received by work group members, that we have to make sure that we communicate to potential vendors that we are brand spanking new. And sorry, Sika, to use the terminology Commissioner Proctor was using last week. We are basically brand new and don't really have a technological infrastructure in place. So quite literally, we started to kind of like go through everything that we have. We have 4 computers, that's it. But as the timing of this gets released, that might be growing and changing and shifting. So in that exhibit, you might have seen a lot of things in yellow. Those are elements that our internal team will be updating to make sure that it is consistent between now and when we publish the final one, to make sure that it shows everything that we're including, or everything that we have, including our existing systems. And one of the questions I'll allude to later is this the appropriate place to mention the future growth ideas? So while we might not be using systems like Spirit or WellSky, some of our community partners are, and you may recall that one of the recommendations by the work group was to make sure that that gets communicated. While this procurement is not for the full hog of phase, the phase 1, 2, and 3 of where we'll eventually get to, and that the recommendation was to keep it simple for this first one, but to let folks know that we may need future integration services. And then to share with them what they might be, and to get a sense of how we might be able to communicate that, or their openness, for example, to maybe write some, some API or some communication services. So that's alluded to a little bit, but it may need to be strengthened depending upon the expertise of the work group. Number 3, exhibit 3 is a standard thing. It's just Form A. It's a legal contract type thing. Basically, this is their disclosures and affirmation statement that needs to be included. And then 4 is divided into 3 kind of technical requirements. It's almost a checklist that potential respondents could go through and indicate what their solution that they're proposing can do. It's broken down into 3 separate attachments, primarily to just make it a little bit more manageable in terms of printing and keeping it organized. And so we have just general requirements on the first one, then all the modules except for finance and accounting, and then finance and accounting. And the modules, really the draft scope of work, this is the big beat. This is what we want. A grant making and contract management solution. And if you look in there, you kind of see almost step by step really what we're needing for that. And in some ways we listed that first because that primarily, like, that is our #1 need right now, like last April, is how do we manage that application process, including a lot of the task flow of workflows and task management and assignments and how many external players and all of that. The second module is performance measurement information system. So this piece is not the integrated system or the full referral tracking or any of the things that our big dreams have, right? This specifically is for those entities that we contract with using the community investment process, the information that they then report back to us, including client level data. So it's not just the aggregate form of contract management, right? Did you meet your deliverables? Are you submitting this? Which is kind of what we're doing right now using Excel spreadsheets and Google Forms. But this is actually getting a little bit more down into the nitty gritty so that we're able to, as Sika mentioned, report out not only just the kind of the widget data, but the impact data, and to be able to create visualizations for where this is occurring in our community. This was another great piece that through the market research phase that we learned has been changing a lot. Many of our sister CSCs don't currently have a lot of that visualization tools because those are emerging technologies that they're now folding into the processes that they're conducting and building. So it's kind of exciting to be on the cutting edge to make sure that what we develop has the capability of doing some of those key pieces, especially how we communicate impact. Third module, customer relationship management. This is just a basic CRM to all of our contract stuff, and you'll see in there kind of the detailed pieces that it's not just about like our, making a newsletter and distributing it out and managing that, but also a tracking tool for TA requests, for just assistance, things like that, that we're able to build into and integrate. And then finally, the finance and accounting kind of module, which is, I'm going to say, fairly straightforward, but might be one of the more complicated elements of it. And so we do hope that to kind of pass this through our finance and accounting team and partner. So you might see some edits made to this section between now and the final one that's published. And the next part of that draft scope of work talks about the phases. And these should look fairly familiar. These are the ones that you guys developed earlier. They have not changed much, except maybe breaking them out with a little bit more description of how we would work together and roll out and create the product. You may have noticed that there is some language in there that says, well, like, this is kind of the order we anticipate it going. It could be that it's a multifaceted approach. So maybe module A has its own phase of development. Module B has its own phase of development, and that they might all be on different timelines. So in the last kind of section, which is the payment schedule, this is what we anticipate it might look like. And so we didn't put any like contract dates or start dates or any of that, because it's really going to be based on what the vendor proposes and how that kind of rolls out. It might be that the module, that everything's based on the implementation of modules 1 and 2, and 3 and 4 come later. And so this is kind of going to have to be negotiated based on how and what they submit. So that would be negotiated in the final part of the contract. So there is some language earlier on in the award process that our legal team is going to be advising us on how to make sure that that final part of the contract is negotiated based on the proposal that is submitted and ultimately selected. So the questions that we have that are kind of pending right now is the vendor presentations being closed instead of them being open and observable to everyone. They will of course be recorded, and if we were doing a true invitation to negotiate, negotiations are able to be closed. So that's a pending question with legal. We're definitely seeking input and feedback on what additional terms need to be added under the definitions section in that scope of work. And as I mentioned earlier, where is the best place to reference future integration partners? That's the presentation. I will turn it back over to Ika in terms of walking that's the full enchilada, if you will, and it was a lot of pages, I know.
Okay, thank you so much, Holly. We know that was a lot of information. It's 41 pages worth of content, but we think that because you guys gave us such a really good start with the request for information and your input, that we've covered pretty much everything we need to be able to move forward with the RFP. So I would like to turn it back over to our chair, Mr. Watts, to move through the next pieces of the agenda, and then of course get any input on our sort of outstanding items, the first of which we're actually waiting to hear back from our legal department. So you may have some thoughts on it, but ultimately that one's going to be governed by our general counsel. So Mr. Watts, I'll turn it back over to you.
Well, I really appreciate it. And I do want to let you all know, the team, just how I think you did a great job of capturing all the information that we talked about as a work group and weaving that into this document. So I did want to applaud you all for that. And then it's open for the work group now. Do you guys have any questions or feedback as far as the document and what Holly just informed us about? I have a few questions, but I want to allow the group to go first.
Holly, did you say there is a rubric for the evaluators that will guide them on the scoring? I think I heard you say that. I was just.
Yes, ma'am. Oh, sorry, Mr. Chair, can I respond? Sorry. It's so hard when we're on Zoom. Normally I would just look at you, but I can't do that. So yes, ma'am, there is an evaluation manual that follows those scoring guidelines and just gives a very detailed breakdown. I can send a sample or direct you to a sample that we used in our ITN for the needs assessment. It's kind of like it's literally called an evaluation manual, and it's always given to the evaluators to help them make sure that they're in line with that. It will be made public during that public meeting when all the evaluators come together and they do the inter-rater reliability on their scores. And so that's when it will be made available to the general public.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Great question, Corey. Any other questions or comments from the work group?
This is great. The only comment I have, Mr. Chair, is I think it was mentioned 30 minutes, Holly, for a presentation. That might be a little short.
Okay.
It's just something to consider because, as you do the introductions and everyone says hello and then, you're 10 minutes in. and it may hurry people. I don't know. It's just something to consider.
Okay, I know when we did the negotiations for the needs assessment, we built in a 10-minute, this is your evaluate, like meet and greet type of thing in their presentation, and the timekeeper didn't start until they said, okay, let's go.
Okay, cool.
But so I think, so take away the meet and greet, the niceties for the pieces that are there. Is 30 minutes too short for doing the demo, like the actual exploration of the things requested? Is it still too short?
It could be. I mean, I think people may feel hurried and they may leave out things that you want to hear or things that you don't want to hear. And that's my only concern. Because if they have enough time to flesh through the different modules, it's just, you know, I think at least 45 minutes, just based on some experience. Because, you know, yeah, it might be 30, may be a little aggressive.
I agree. I would say at least 45.
All right, great feedback there as well. Any other questions or comments? Nothing else? I have a question about the modules and the cost. And this is just information wise. So I know the cost, I think, is 150,000 is what's listed, right? And I'm wondering for the experts in the work group, the modules that they have listed, is there a potential that we are asked? In other words, how do we prevent that number 150 from capping us off from what we're trying to accomplish with those modules? Does that make any sense? So does it seem like the modules, what we have there is possibly in line with the 150 amount that we have listed? I don't know how you can answer that or not, but let's say that someone comes forth and they're able to knock out of the park all of these module options that are listed, but it's not possibly coming in at that 150. How do you open the door to, I don't know if that made any sense.
So Chair Watts, if I could jump in. So in my mind, this is one of those where I've been at organizations where they don't put what their budget is, and then they just kind of get what they get and move from there. We're in a situation where our budget is publicly noticed, not once, not twice, but several times. So it's very easy to go and find that number. If we end up in a situation where we are getting responses that are nowhere near the funding that has been approved, there are a couple of things that we could do. And so maybe this is a question we need to ask. Do we have them in the RFP price out the modules and give us a priority? Because with the modules, there could be a priority or a hierarchy that makes them work. And then, of course, the other option that we have is going back to the council with the documentation that what we have requested and need, there's a market difference between what was approved and where it looks like this is coming in. Now, let me also say, of course, for those that are out in the universal space and possibly watching this, we want to ensure that we get a good system, but we also need to ensure that we are focusing the majority of these taxpayer dollars on the services and the priority funding and the investment. So what I hope I did was give a very tactful way of saying, we want to stay as close to, if not under, the amount that has been budgeted. So I think we have a couple ways we can address it. And I would be interested, given your comment, your question, to hear what the work group thinks about that. And then Mr. Watts, I see Holly has her hand up as well.
Yes, go ahead, Holly.
I just want to simply add to the conversation that during the market research. Several of the respondents to our RFI and some of the subsequent folks that we were doing, reaching out to just to kind of get a ballpark, that there were multiple solutions available that are in our range. Noting that pricing out each module, I think, is a very clever idea, side note, but that lots, and I would say more, of the potential vendors that are out there exceed the range. So while there are solutions, I'll just report that back, is that there are solutions that are in the range. The majority of folks that we spoke to that expressed interest, that responded to the RFI, exceeded the range that we've published. So I just wanted the work group to have that information while you discuss this issue.
Thank you, Holly. And Sika, I too just want to copy what Holly said. I mean, the module idea, I think, is something definitely to consider. What I was looking at as well is, so thank you for the response. You answered my questions. Is that with your timeline, I'm just looking ahead and planning for the, if you're trying to get by December 1st, and let's say, even as well as the work group has done, if those discussions start arising, when people are presenting, and it may have been something, presented that we didn't necessarily think about, that might, alter or potentially alter things, is how do you weave that in there to then also, try to keep in line with your timeline. Work group, did you guys have any other feedback or comments on that? And Sika, I see you lighted up there for a second. Did you want to say something?
No, I was kind of looking around to see if anybody unmuted because they had something really not positive, what's the word? Had some input, to give. I will just be, so first of all, to reiterate, Holly, and you guys saw it in the R5. I mean, you could go anywhere from $25,000 all the way up to in the millions. And so what we also did as a part of the RFI process, and really just as a part of developing and developing the infrastructure and every process that we're doing as a CSC, we went to other CSCs to see what they were using, to see what that cost them, to see if they were getting what they needed out of the systems. And so again, you run the gambit. You have some that are right there and they have that recurring less than 100,000, maybe in some cases 50,000 or less. And then you have those that are very robust. They're very solid CSCs where literally they have whole departments that can manage this for them, build out modules, be able to look at those ITNs or RFPs, so that depending on what they need or want to be able to show, they can literally, go out and get it. I don't know that we would ever be at that point. So when you look at the revenues that would come in for the CSC here in Leon County, I think out to 32, all things being equal, and things keep going the way that they're going, I think the most we would get in around 2032 would be 15 million. So Miami gets that in a month, just to put it in perspective. So what we don't want to end up with is this robust system that is taking up a fifth of our budget, right? So we want to be able to manage the application process. We want to have those financial components to do that. And let me say, and I don't know if this should go in the in the RFP or not. We currently have some external pieces that are helping us with the operations of the organization. So we use Paychex to do payroll. We have a contracted CPA. We now have Dina as our finance and operations director to help manage those. And so I think the most important piece of this is managing that grants process and being able to automate it and being able to pull the data out of it so that we can show the impact. The financial piece as far as payroll and all of that, I mean, it's nice, but that could come along. So now that we're kind of talking through it, maybe, you know, prioritizing the modules might be something we want to do in the RFP, given that we have some interim solutions that will help us as we, you know, still grow and develop into this CSC. So those were just kind of some thoughts that were going through my head. And I never thought of that. I just want to be, never thought of it until we got into this conversation. Like never. Read through the IT, read through all the information. It never hit me till we just got here.
All right, awesome. We have any comments from the group on that? Thank you, Sika. So, go ahead. Yes, Eddie.
Yeah. And I love those ideas. My only concern is if we put priorities. I think that's a good idea, but you could get vendors that will use up the entire funds for that number one priority, which gets us something versus them being creative or willing to spread it out and provide more than just one, you know, module, for example, like our number one thing that we need. And so I think the wording, you know, ultimately we want as many modules and functionality as possible in that priority list if we go that route. We may get responses that say we can do number one for $150,000. And so I'm hopeful that the partners will be willing to understand that we may have a priority list, but we really need more than the first item or functionality, you know, even in this initial phase. So I may have not articulated that correctly, but that's my only worry.
Again, great feedback on that. Any other additional comments or questions or feedback? Let me ask the CSC. I think I saw Mr. Neal, so I don't know the rules around that.
Oh, in terms of public comment. So point of clarification would be that once you are, I'm sorry, Sika, this is totally your role. I'm so sorry. Okay.
That's okay. Yes. So technically we have a public comments section that will come at the center, not the center, at the end when that discussion is over. However, I think it would be very apropos to ask Mr. Skeen to contribute. Which you can do, Mr. Watts.
Okay, all right, got it. Okay, yes, Mr. Skeen, I think you had something to share. We can't hear you. Can't hear you yet.
Is it?
Wait, try that again. Yes.
Does that work?
Yes.
Okay, I'll throw out these pieces. I just wanted to ask a question really based on our experience from the needs analysis negotiation that might be, maybe it's helpful. At the end of and I know that was an ITN, so this is different, but at the end, we basically asked the two finalists to do something additional and to state a cost for that something additional. So I'm just wondering if there is a way legally to build into an RFP the same kind of selectivity or option by the council at the point that came. And these folks who've done this with other agencies might have some experience about that kind of approach. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Skeen. And Holly, I see your hand raised.
So we can, so it's a little bit different from the ITN process in terms of we can't have Q&A with them during their demonstration, where they then get the opportunity to come back with a quote best and final. What they can do in an RFP process is that we can build it into the language that's originally in there. So we could add that as one of the recommendations is, if in reviewing this ITN, there's an area of extra that you think would be relevant, then you feel free to enumerate it here. The issue and we can then build that into what I would call the ongoing support or the ongoing training and support section in terms of the evaluation, because even in that we're indicating, for example, the cost of the one where we said that this is our budget is kind of like for the first year implementation. We recognize that there's also going to be additional costs for ongoing maintenance and maybe subscription, right? So like your implementation cost might be 125,000 and then your annual upkeep might be 60,000. And so we're having them report that in two separate areas. So we could enumerate it out that way, and that under the ongoing support and training, or maybe even just under cost in general, we can say, you know, bid sheet number 1 is for the actual implementation of the modules we've requested. Bid sheet number 2 is the cost of that, the annual membership subscription, like so that people can weigh that. And then maybe bid sheet number 3, if you will, or budget sheet, not bid sheet, y'all. Budget sheet could be things you might not have thought about, right? And so that we could build the questioning in if that's the will of the group. So I think that there are ways of doing it. And then if we do the 45 minutes for the demonstration, we could even build that into, like, have a portion of your agenda be dedicated to any outside pieces that you think we should consider. And so it gives them a little bit of that, I'm going to put my best foot forward to wow you. But if we're pairing that with that kind of amending that cost section to include kind of a breakdown of each module, it probably wouldn't hurt to then build that piece in there. Then we can make the evaluation criteria follow that. And so in that way, you could do it through the RFP process without extending our timeline into a formal ITN. And now I'll lower my hand. Sorry, Mr. Chair.
All right. No, thank you, Ms. Holly.
And again, if that's the will of the group.
Siko, I think you were going to say something, looks like.
I was also going to say, I actually am thinking it wouldn't be a bad idea for us to do, it's a bidders conference, or we build into the timeline that's already there, the opportunity for those companies, organizations who are interested in this RFP, a time for them to get together with us. And not only will we go through the RFP, very similar to what we do with organizations that are seeking funding from us. So it would be the opportunity for them to meet with us as a staff, Chair Watts as a council member, and we go through the RFP. And then we're also able to communicate some of the intangibles that you can't put in the RFP or will not come across in the RFP, but rather come across in just that conversation. So we have the ability to do that, which I'm fairly sure, given this conversation, we're going to build into the timeline as well, without impacting the timeline, those major deliverable points in the timeline as it stands.
So any other questions or comments? And thank you, Mr. Skeen. Thank you, Holly, for that feedback. Any other questions or comments from the group? I guess I have one follow-up to that for the team. So with everything that was just discussed around that item, is there anything that we would need to repeat and actually vote on, or that's a yes? Okay. So should we finish the conversation first and like officially say, hey, we have no more questions or comments, and then come back to that, or? Okay. So do we have any more questions or comments as far as the document? that was all I had was the budget question, the cost question. So anything else from the group? I have one more piece. I'm sorry. The evaluation team. I know we're not necessarily there quite yet, but the evaluation team, I would just give my 2 cents. I think we really would have to have possibly some folks with the background, if at all possible, in this arena to really, yeah, okay. So any other questions or comments? All right, well, with that said, I am going to ask for a motion around the edits that we just discussed, but let's see if we have any public comment. Well, first, let's see if we have any public comment, and then we will, before we vote or ask for a motion, we will make sure we understand what we're asking a motion for. I think that made sense. So Jacinta, do we have any public comment group? Any public comments?
There's no public comment.
Okay, so Holly, I'm going to put you on the spot, or Sika, whoever I'm supposed to ask. What exactly, if you had to clean up what we are possibly going to be asking for a motion on around the edits, I can definitely give an attempt at it, but you probably have it.
Actually, if you look at your screen,
Oh, here we go.
be able to see the committee recommendation, a draft
Got it.
committee recommendation that Holly is sharing. So any motion would
Okay.
basically be what's here.
Awesome, perfect. So
And I
Thank you.
think I captured the pieces. The only thing I did not capture from the discussion was what Mr. Skeen was suggesting. So I can live edit if you'd like me to.
before we go there, I'm going to go to Mr. Darren. Darren, you have something?
No, I was just reviewing, and I think that captures the nature of all the comments that were made. I was going to go ahead if it was appropriate time to make the motion.
Okay. Yep. We have a motion, and do I have a second from the group?
Second, Eddie Gonzalez Lemire.
Second from Mr. Eddie. All right, perfect. So so moved, and all right. So we will move on to the next item. And this is does anyone from the group?
Mr. Chair.
Oh, yes.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
So we just following our rules of order, you need to actually do a yay or nay vote.
Oh, perfect. Okay. All right. So
Or you can do consensus. You can do consensus saying
or
that
consensus.
everybody.
okay. All right. So do we have everyone in agreement with the motion and the second around the recommendations that we just discussed and put forth? You can all say yay or raise a hand or.
Yes.
Okay. All right. I think we have. Yes.
Good.
Okay. All right. We're good. All right. So we will move on to the next topic. And this is now just open for comments in general from the work group. Do you guys have any additional comments, anything that we possibly missed, or anything in general from the experience? It's an open forum for the work group. All right, so no comments there. And so I will take this opportunity. When Holly said March, I forgot it was that long ago. I will take this opportunity to thank everybody for your participation in this work group. I thoroughly enjoyed the experience, and we know that you took your time out of your day to actually participate in this, so we very much appreciate it. And I'm going to open it up for the team if they want to add any comments to the work group as well, as far as their volunteering and participation. Okay, Holly.
So I will defer to Holly.
Okay.
I just wanted to echo what Chair Watts said. I know that some of the conversations that I've had with each of you were phone calls, some of them meetings in your office, some of them walking around the meadows, to be able to really understand like what we're trying to build and what the resources are out there. And the tool that we've put together would not have been possible without you weighing in thoughtfully and kind of helping us really kind of go through each of those elements. And so I just wanted to say thank you. As someone who is a self-described nerd, who loves data systems and could speak in spreadsheets and zeros and ones all day long, I'm really excited what we have before us, or what we have the potential to build before us, and knowing that you guys are partners in that is very, very helpful. And we will continue to keep knocking, especially as we develop that true evaluation team of any individuals who would not potentially bid on the contract to actually serve in that evaluation capacity. Because while we know some, and I think that our entire team is pretty tech savvy, we are not experts in any system or by any stretch of the imagination. And there were concepts quite literally that I know Marcus and Eddie brought to the table, like saying, even just like saying certain using certain terminologies that we guessed what meant, but it was very helpful to have that dictionary and someone explain it to us. So just want to again say thank you so much for multiple afternoons and your eyeballs and reading on various things.
Yeah, and adding to that, I think it was a great learning experience for me too. I know a lot more about the great things that are happening and are going to happen. And as a resident citizen of this community, that's huge. So I'm very proud of all the work that is ongoing, and I feel proud to be, a little part of it. I'm also grateful that you all included, the entrepreneurial community. As someone who works closely with folks like Corey and others in the community around talent, workforce, and retention, there are children today that in a few years, before you know it, will be working on computers, doing amazing things for amazing companies in town. So I feel like this is one of those foundational components that we're going to look back and say, remember those meetings? Well, a lot of those children are now, changing the world. So I'm grateful to be part of this really well organized and led process.
Thank you so very much. I will end by just saying again how I started, and that was thank you for giving us your time, your talents, and your treasure for helping us kind of move forward in this space. The CSC will never be about operating in a vacuum, and part of the ways CSCs operate and why they have been successful is because they involve the community in as many aspects as possible. And so that you thought it not robbery, to borrow a term from a very good friend, we just can't say thank you enough. And with that, feel free to email us, anyone of your colleagues or other people in our community that have the kind of expertise that we need, just to reiterate what Holly said, to possibly serve on an evaluation team, because I know just enough to be dangerous. And I know what I wanted to do. I can't tell you how to get it there, but I can definitely tell you that ain't it. Or jump for joy when it does it. So again, just thank you guys. Chair Watts, I'll turn it back over to you to close us out and adjourn us.
All right, thank you very much. And I did want to just add a little message from Corey. She had to hop off, and she said it's been a great process and the team has made a huge project manageable. So with that said, if no additional comments or feedback, this meeting is adjourned.